But Jonathan Cohen is more interested in another part of the prefrontal cortex, deeper down in the brain, which also seems to get involved when we're faced with inner conflict.
It's this strip of cortex right along here, lying just over the corpus callosum, which is this white area right there.
This brain region is called the anterior cingulate, which Cohen believes is watching out for those times when it's hard to make up your mind. Consider this classic problem in philosophy, involving a train, or in some versions a trolley. You're standing next to a railroad switch as a train approaches. If you do nothing, the train will surely kill 5 foolish but innocent people standing on the track. You could save them by hitting the switch, diverting the train. The problem is that there's another foolish innocent standing on the second track.
So the moral question here is it okay to hit the switch so that you only run over 1 person instead of 5? What do you think? Off the top of your head.
Yeah, off the top of my head, it seems it would be regrettable to kill anybody, but if you could save the 5 people, then you would throw the switch.
Well, that's what pretty much everyone we ask says. Okay, now here's a slightly different case.
Right.
Trolley headed towards 5 people. This time there's no other track. You're on a footbridge, standing over the track, and you're standing next to this big person. And this time, the only way you can save those 5 people is to push the big guy off of the bridge. He'll land on the tracks. He'll get squashed by the train. He'll die, but the 5 people will live.
Okay, so would I push the guy off the bridge? Well, it's so hypothetical. I mean, I don't even understand. First of all, I don't understand how he could. I'd have to be really convinced that it could stop the train. But I'd be, as I'm sure most people would be, less inclined to push the guy. But I don't know. Depends. It kind of depends. I mean, do I have anything against this guy? I mean, would it matter to me if I lost him?
Yeah.
I mean,
but I think the fact that you're looking for all of these sort of angles and ways out and things to question is very telling, because most people are made rather uncomfortable by that one.
Right.
And
but taking an active role.
Right. Now, these are very similar cases. I mean, it's death by trolley to 1 person in order to save 5 people. Perhaps you can try to find a reason for why it's okay and why it's not. And this is what philosophers have been busy doing. Well, we put the philosophical question about what's right and what's wrong aside for a second and say, what's going on in the brain?
What they found when people struggled with these problems in a scanner is that regions of the brain thought to be involved in emotion lit up when people thought about pushing the guy off the bridge. And just as I did, it took them longer to make that decision than the less personal one of throwing the switch. The Princeton researchers also borrowed a storyline from the last episode of MASH in their exploration of how the brain wrestles with moral dilemmas. A bus full of people has to hide from enemy soldiers.
Quiet. Now nobody make a sound until they've passed us.
But a crying baby endangers everyone's life. In the MASH story, Hawkeye urges the mother to keep the baby quiet, and she ends up smothering it. In the Princeton study, subjects were asked to decide if it's okay to smother the baby in a case like this. They were also asked about a second moral choice.
Teenage mother gives birth in the locker room at school, and she just doesn't want to deal with it. Is it okay for her to just throw the baby in the dumpster? Almost everybody says no, that's not okay, and they say no very quickly. That's a personal case in the sense of it has that up-close and personal interaction. It's the same kind of action, killing your own child, as in the MASH sort of case. But very different in terms of what's going on in people's heads. In both cases, according to our view, there's a prepotent emotional response that says, no, no, don't do it. In the case with the teenage mother, because, at least according to our moral views, there are no strong countervailing rational considerations that would make that okay. You could probably come up with some if you modified the case a bit, but the thought is that the emotion occurs and it just wins because there's nothing to oppose it. Whereas in the MASH kind of case, you have that prepotent emotional response, but then your reason kicks in and says, well, wait a second, if you don't do this, everybody could die, including the baby. And so there's this drawn-out conflict, and instead of people answering it in 2 seconds or 3 seconds, they take closer to 10 seconds to give their answer.
Josh Green is now looking at the brain scans of people wrestling with the MASH kind of case
to see if the anterior cingulate, which the Princeton group believes is monitoring conflict, is working overtime, listening to all the different parts of the brain, both rational and emotional, clamoring for input before someone finally makes up their mind. Decisions that mix emotion with reason are awfully hard to make, and the longer it takes if the Princeton team is on the right track, the more that little strip of brain called the anterior cingulate is calling on your frontal lobes to resolve the conflict and make up your mind.